Hey guys, welcome back to the show. I am your host, ITalkDisneyParks, where we talk about all things Disney parks. Out of all Disney roller coasters, none has a more interesting history than Space Mountain, which is the topic of today's video. Today we're going to be going over the entire history of Space Mountain. However, quick disclaimer, this is only about the history of the Disneyland Paris Space Mountain, which does not include the Disneyland or Disney World Space Mountain. But without further ado, let's fly into it! Get it? 'Cause astronauts in Space Mountain... I'll stop. We start our journey back in the year of 1865 with a man named Jules Verne, with his famous novel called From the Earth to the Moon. It is a very famous novel in a post-American Civil War society about a Baltimore gun club attempting to build a Columbia space gun in an attempt to shoot themselves to the moon. I know it sounds crazy, but just bear with me. So, you're probably wondering now, why bring this up in the first place? Well, it's pretty simple. The original ride is based off it. The first ever adaptation of the legendary Space Mountain we know today was dubbed Space Mountain From the Earth to the Moon. Main premise of this ride was very cool. You start off in a Columbia space gun, or the cannon, and prepare for launch. Then you launch out of the cannon to the moon. It is a very fun and exciting twisting ride through almost pitch darkness. The classic version of Space Mountain was built in Euroland Disney, now known as Disneyland Paris, if you didn't pick up on that earlier. Now, Space Mountain was actually never originally planned for this, but something much, much bigger. Now, you may be wondering why this original idea never came to be, and this is for one simple reason: the cost. You see, the original plan for Space Mountain wasn't just some enclosed dark roller coaster, no, rather a huge pavilion of attractions. The pavilion was huge, over twice the size of the current Space Mountain in Disney World. The pavilion was named Discovery Mountain. The pavilion was an indoor area themed after a mysterious-looking island. In the bay around the island there was the Nautilus, the famous ship from an old Disney ride. This Nautilus was intended into being a walkthrough exhibit to explore the famous ship. There were a couple of other rides that were to be built within the pavilion, such as the Drop Tower, also based off of a Jules Verne's story called Journey to the Center of the Earth. Plus, there was going to be a futuristic train station for the Euroland Disney train to stop at. But alas, the main attraction of the pavilion, a Space Mountain that's obviously based off From the Earth to the Moon. The ride had the same premise as the actual first Space Mountain that was built, in which riders were launched from a cannon to the moon. Unfortunately, due to the huge budget of the project, Euro Disney could not afford it. The hope was that after opening, since they hadn't opened the park yet when designing this, they would be able to get the funds to create the project, but this would never come to be. The opening of Euro Disney was terrible, with only half the expected visitors and only making a portion of the money expected. Now with this terrible start of Euroland Disney, this ride could not be originally made, but after a few months, even though they still were struggling, they decided to make Space Mountain. However, due to the lack of funding, this idea was never built to its legendary idea as you'd expect. However, what we got was still great. The ride that did get made still did feature many of the original ideas from the plan. A bay was still built with the Nautilus, just without the walkthrough exhibit and restaurant. It also, of course, had the iconic cannon, and it was like the ride I described before, just it didn't go out over a pavilion. It all was indoors. And on June 1st, 1995, Space Mountain was officially open to the public. From the Earth to the Moon was a massive hit right away for many reasons. For starters, this was the first ride to ever have an audio track that syncs with what's going on in the ride, helping make the whole experience a lot more immersive. There was also amazing effects such as smoke, there was amazing theming, and just an overall amazing ride. In fact, this was such a great ride that it even helped Euro Disney turn its first profit, thus practically saving the park. Unfortunately, this ride only got to entertain guests for a decade, until the change. You see, after the addition of Space Mountain from the Earth to the Moon's success for Euroland Disney, Disney decided to go full send with one of their biggest ambitions yet. This promise being to create Disney's MGM Studios, now known today as Hollywood Studios. The main problem with this is that despite Space Mountain helping Disneyland Euro get back on their feet, the park was not even close to entirely stable. However, the park was still built. You see, MGM Studios did not have a great launch. Upon opening, the park only had 3 rides, with most of the other attractions being stuff like shows. This is clearly terrible for the park, since if you're going to a theme park, you'd expect rides, right? Well, either way, this was still terrible for the park. As stated by Disney, many events such as 9/11, constant bad weather, and things such as the war in Iraq made tourism terrible. While I never stated it before, Disney had to actually restructure the financial system of Disneyland Europe, and it happened again. Like what I said before, even though Space Mountain helped save Disneyland Europe, it was still really struggling, and them redoing this financial system put a huge blow in their finances. Since this was such a bad blow for Disneyland Euro, they decided to turn back to what saved them in the first place. Due to the low attendance rate and yet another downfall of Euro Disney, Space Mountain was the park's best bet to save them. And it was also about time for Space Mountain's 10th anniversary. Due to these 2 factors, Euro Disney decided to revamp Space Mountain to Space Mountain Mission 2, aka Space Mountain 2.0. This new version of the ride removed almost all objects based off of Jules Verne's novel and added more broad space-themed items. They also added different lighting and some changes to the canon. The response, unsurprisingly, was quite negative, at least at the start, due to the lack of story and excitement this ride had compared to the old one. It felt less iconic and fun compared to the original ride. However, it was still not hated. In fact, many people still love this ride. But especially, people still love the ride due to the fast and fun track with not terrible theming. Yes, story is important, but let's be honest. You ride a ride for the fun and experience more than the story. Plus, even with the hate, it still gained huge popularity. Even with people who enjoyed the old ride. Just not as much as the original, which is understandable. The ride ran for over a decade, closing January of 2017 for a renovation. Most of you Disney nerds out there actually know this is called a overlay, meaning it doesn't actually change much of the ride, but it's more just changed for a certain amount of time. The ride reopened in May of 2017 with a new Star Wars overlay called Hyperspace Mountain. This version of the ride just closed pretty recently, around late 2018, and will soon be re-replaced with Mission 2 again. So what do you guys think on the history of Space Mountain? Let me know in the comments below. I wish I could have experienced the original ride. It sounded great. Anyway, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you later. Bye!